Good morning, good evening, namaskar. Welcome to the next round of webinar discussions held by IAPC, the Indian American Press Club. And I just want for folks who are joining us for the first time to give you a quick heads up that IAPC is a nonprofit org headquartered in New York City, formed in 2013 with the goals of providing a common platform for journalists of Indian origin living in the United States and bringing eminent personalities to the forefront to have discussions such as the one we're about to have today, a very important topic. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off today's webinar on Indo US relationships and how they'll evolve under the new Biden-Harris administration. So there's a lot to discuss here, a lot to kind of get into the weeds about. So I'm very happy to introduce some key members of the IAPC team who will then introduce our wonderful panelists in today's webinar. So we'll get started. Of course, I want to give a shout out to Dr. Joe Chalil, who is at the helm, at the head here, putting all this together. Thank you so much, Dr. Chalil. And I'd like to invite Mr. Biju Chakoji, who is the General Secretary of IAPC, to kick us off with the introductions of our wonderful panelists. Mr. Chako, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's our webinar series number 2 for the IAPC Indo US relationship under Biden-Harris administration. I'm here to welcome Ambassador Deepak Vora, an Indian diplomat who served as secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs and has served as ambassador of India to Poland. During his service in the Indian Foreign Service, he had served in various capacities in several countries around the world. Ambassador Vora brings extensive insight and expertise on developmental matters in developing countries and an understanding of political mechanics in Africa. He's an alumnus of St. Stephen's College, Delhi, St. Columbus School, National Defense College in India, and the University of Paris. He's currently the Special Advisor to Prime Minister of India, Lesotho, and Guinea-Bissau. Welcome to our webinar, Ambassador Deepak Vora.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Bijo Chako. Welcome, Ambassador Vora. It's a pleasure to have you as always. Moving on, I'd like to invite Miss Minnie Phillip, who is the president of the IAPC Philadelphia chapter. Miss Phillip, I'd invite you to please introduce our next eminent guest.
Ambassador Pradeep Kumar Kapoor is currently a visiting scholar at the Elliott School of International Affairs, George Washington University. Acknowledged as a luminary diplomat, Ambassador Kapoor had a distinguished career working closely with leaders and policymakers in different continents: Asia, South Asia and Southeast Asia, Africa, Europe, North America, and South America. His new book, co-authored with Dr. Joseph Chalil, Beyond the COVID-19 Pandemic, Envisioning a Better World by Transforming the Future of Healthcare, is on Amazon's bestseller list. Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor of IFS 1979 was recently conferred IAPC 2020 Excellence in Literature Award and the 2020 Healthcare of All Award by the Raymond Aaron Group. Welcome, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor.
Thank you very much, Willie. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Miss Phillip, and of course, Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. Pleasure to have you, sir. Moving on, I'd like to see, is Miss Anita Naveen with us today? Miss Anita, are you with us?
I think she's took the wrong link, but maybe Matthew Joyce, sir, can you introduce?
If Mr. Matthew Joyce, if you could introduce our next speaker, panelist in today's webinar, the professor joining us from India, please.
Matthew Joyce, are you ready?
Biju.
Okay. All right, I'll take the privilege of introducing Dr. Madhav Das Nalapat. He's a well-known author, writer, academician, and columnist. Currently, he's the editorial director of ITV Network India and the Sunday Guardian, vice chair of Manipal Advanced Research Group, and director of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations in Manipal University. He has been the coordinating editor of the Times of India and editor of Madhubhumi. He's the son of the famous author and poet Kamala Surya. I hereby welcome Dr. Nalapat to our midst.
Thank you, Mr. Chaco, again, and of course, welcome, Professor. It's great to have you, and thank you for bringing the ground perspective from India. We really appreciate that. So let's get this conversation started. You know, if one thing holds true, it is that under the Trump administration, the U.S.-India relationship did flourish. Specifically, the friendship cultivated between Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi did yield some strategic benefits, both for New Delhi as well as Washington, D.C. But how does that translate in this new incoming administration, where on one hand you have President-elect Joe Biden, who promises to bring a stability and a sense of comfort in his leadership, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, who brings a sense of pride for Indians everywhere for her position. So with all these questions hanging in the air, I will kick off this webinar with our first big question here. With a new U.S. administration coming in, what changes can we anticipate in the India-U.S. relationship? And I'd love for Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor to get this conversation started. Ambassador, how do you see this on a high level? How do you anticipate some changes that will come as a result of this new administration, sir?
There's a French saying, the more the change, the more it remains the same. So this is what will apply, I guess, in the India-US relationship. It has already reached a very significant level of partnership between the two countries. Both the countries currently realize what the future holds for either of them and how important the other partner is in this entire process. So we have to now see, after what the previous administration has achieved in terms of very significant milestones and landmark agreements and decisions between the two governments, how to carry this forward, and how do we utilize the capital in terms of the support which is there for this process in the US and in India. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ambassador. You know, one of the big things that is a determining factor in the success of this partnership is, of course, the geographical realities that India is facing today, namely its contentious relationship with China at the moment. And in fact, it's been historically contentious. China on one hand, Pakistan on the other. But specifically talking about China, the Trump administration did give a boost to the Indian partnership by opposing China as drastically as it did. Should relations between the US and China continue to deteriorate, and should a Cold War-like situation emerge, how might this new administration leverage its relationship with India to benefit in some way, to gain some kind of an advantage in some way? And I'd love for Professor Nalapat to get us started, but I would like a comment from all of our guests on this. Professor, please kick us off.
Well, I simply want to say that, American voters, frankly, they don't pay much attention to foreign policy when they elect their president. But presidents have to pay a lot of attention to foreign policy for the simple reason that in the United States, foreign policy and relations with foreign countries plays a very important role in the life of the average American. You have seen, for example, a lot of cities that have been devastated by the fact that their manufacturing and services have hollowed out and they've been replaced by manufacturers and services from China. We have seen the same thing in India. You've seen the situation in which the Department of Homeland Security, the Treasury, etc., the FBI, they're having to work overtime because of the threat of terror. Well, guess what? I mean, which are the crucibles of terror? They're not anywhere near you. They're certainly not in the Atlantic or Pacific Oceans. They're right here in West Asia, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia. So the reality is that American lives are affected by foreign policy. Now, having said that, I want to say that these foreign policy realities are not going to change. What will change are individual perceptions and not foreign policy realities. And one of the big realities today, and this is something that I've been writing about for quite some time, I think Ambassador Kapoor will definitely have studied that, has been the fact that the Chinese essentially are at war with the US dollar. It's a currency war. And in that war, they are basically, I mean, I'm not going to, say that they are working for a reset, but they're certainly expecting a major reset of the US dollar. And in which case, the US dollar will no longer be the global reserve currency that it has been effectively from about 1941, when the US stepped into the shoes of Great Britain as the preeminent power in the world. So you have this currency war now. You have this, frankly, this war now take, for example, Iran, take, for example, Pakistan, take, for example, all these countries that are nurturing certain groups which are pretty unwelcome to Israel especially, and also to the United States. And you will find one country extremely close to these countries, in fact, facilitating them, facilitating their militaries. And the militaries facilitate in turn some associates of theirs, and many of them are involved in activities across Europe, across the United States, and this is something that has been, again, well known to the FBI. We had a situation in India, and I've been tracking this for a long time as somebody outside the government, but fortunately with friends in the government, a few of them here and there, in some positions. And I've been in the sense, I wouldn't say working, but I would say interacting very closely with them. And of course, that's part of the reason why I'm stuck in this place, Gurugram, instead of Kerala or my campus, because unfortunately traveling is a real problem these days because of the panic of this pandemic. Having said that, I want to say that, look, the reality of the situation is not going to change because you have a new occupant in the White House. There is Cold War 2.0 going on between the United States and China. Cold War 1.0 was a battle of systems, a battle between the system of the Soviet Union and the system which is led by the United States. I would say democracy, liberal, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, etc. Today you have Cold War 2.0. And I can tell you that China is, in my view, I haven't really, I haven't gone that many times to Moscow or to St. Petersburg. And frankly, during the time of the Soviet Union, not at all. But I used to meet Russians quite frequently when they used to come to India. Remember, we were the greatest buddies of Russia, and we were certainly not buddies of your country. But I'd like to say that the Chinese have developed their economy. They have developed their geopolitical power as a result of Japan, the United States, and Taiwan. And all three countries are now targets of China. I mean, if China has developed, it is because of these three countries, principally the United States of America. But today a situation has come in which the Chinese are, in my opinion, at least equal to the Americans on artificial intelligence, which basically means war and defense, etc. Now, what does artificial intelligence do? It enables the Chinese Communist Party to track every individual who's in China, what that individual is saying to his or her friends, what that individual is watching on television, what that individual, frankly, where he's going, whom he's meeting, whom he's not meeting, his attitudes. Everything is now tracked in a way, frankly, that could never be tracked by the Soviet Union, which lacked this modern technology, which is there in the United States, is there in India, and this is a modern technology of AI. China is now, in my view, practically equal to United States in AI. It's getting there in space. And in terms of defense capability, it's maybe about 12 or 13 years behind the United States, but it's catching up very fast. So this is therefore, in my view, why Cold War 2.0 is a reality, and why it's also a reality that India and the United States have and will form a very strong alliance, no matter who's the president.
Absolutely. And this is 100% true, Professor Nalapat, that the relationship does endure regardless of who is in that White House, in that chair. But, you know, if Cold War 1.0 was a battle of systems, I don't think anyone can disagree with you, Professor, that Cold War 2.0, if it should get to that level, will be a battle of technologies, as that seems to be the most contentious thing between China and the United States, especially in terms of intellectual property theft. But Ambassador Deepak Vohra, I'd love for you to join the conversation here and give your comments about this potential Cold War 2.0 and how the incoming administration could have its impact in this relationship.
Right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Always a pleasure to interact with you. I feel somewhat embarrassed because you have these brilliant minds on your panel, and I consider myself totally inadequate. You talked about eminent personalities. I don't know who you were referring to. Well, give me about 10 minutes, if you don't mind, so that I can try and give some kind of background on this. What Professor Nalapat just said, that China was able to develop because of Taiwan, Japan, United States. China throughout history is well known for biting the hand that fed it or feeds it. 2,500 years ago, there was a thinker, a character in India called Chanakya, who very wisely said that there can be no friendship without self-interest. Relationships between nations, as among humans, are based on perceptions. When the goals coincide, friendship blooms, however temporarily. Now, we refer to the Cold War, Cold War I. No resident of the White House, and there were several, or of the Kremlin, could change things. There was a momentum in that relationship. As goals change, relationships change. Human, as in international affairs, ma'am, equals are rarely partners. More often, they are rivals. We saw this with the Soviet Union and the United States. We are seeing it with China and the United States. You will continue to see it amongst whoever does Cold War III or IV or V. The half century after the Second World War, what did the US want? Its number one enemy after Germany had been neutralized and absorbed into the Western system was the communist threat. So the US sought alliances wherever it could. Along with many other nations, we preferred non-alignment. So our relationship with the United States, forget about this shared democracy, shared values, and all this rubbish, it doesn't matter in international affairs. Our relationship was in a state of stasis. America saw us as Soviet sidekicks. We saw the USA as a big bully, period. Now, in the mid-1960s, our agriculture, if you recall, Professor Nalapat, was in deep stress. Monsoon failure, war, infestations, etc. We received 9 and 11 million tons of US food grains under the infamous PL 480 program. Largest import, ma'am, of food in human history. But in its handling, it became a public relations disaster. 1971, the attempt to coerce India in favor of Pakistan, you know, the Seventh Fleet and all that stuff. We had never been a security threat to the US, but they became a security threat to us. That is still remembered. So the collapse of the USSR in 1991 saw a reassessment on both sides of this relationship, more on our side. Now, we had the Kargil crisis in 1999. The Americans were not terribly helpful. Some other countries were. America was interested not because Pakistan had engineered it, because they were afraid it could lead to a nuclear flare-up. Even as late as December 1999, when we were bewildered by the hijack of our plane to Afghanistan, our American friends were a little reluctant to help us, some others did. 9/11 marks a turning point, a milestone, because that's what brought home to America the danger of Islamic terrorism, something we had been suffering since the late 1980s. Now the US wanted to co-opt us into the global war on terror. You know, if you are not with us, you're against us kind of thing. And over the past 20 years, this bilateral relationship has strengthened, partly because America's China fantasy, the fantasy that was born in 1972, has soured. In interstate relations, ma'am, the big and strong ones carry what I call the burden of power differential. That the big fellow who has this sense of superiority wants to manage international affairs in accordance with his or her national interests. Alliances and friendships are formed when economic interests or security is threatened. That is what is happening today. Both of us feel threatened. Our economic interests are being challenged. Our security is being challenged. Therefore, this relationship, nobody on earth, no power on earth, as Victor Hugo said, can stop an idea whose time has come. The time has come for India and America to tell the world that the best system in the universe, in human history, is not this so-called socialism with Chinese characteristics, but it is democracy with universal characteristics. Therefore, nobody can set the clock back. Whether it's Mr. Biden or Ms. Kamala Harris or anybody else, the momentum is going to be carried forward on its own. The final thing I'd like to say, ma'am, there always is an event that is a kind of climacteric in human history. It's a cataclysmic event. You know what happened in June when 20 brave hearts, 20 of my sons died, but we thrashed the Chinese. Now, this is going to be written about for years, for centuries, long after I have transitioned to a better world. People would say this was the event that exposed the Chinese for the cowards that they are. They had this self-imposed, self-created image of being invincible. They were not. And we proved that to the rest of the world. That is when the rest of the world, particularly the United States, began to take the Indian military seriously. Here are these guys who've thrashed the Chinese. There must be something to them, because India and the United States are the two big militaries from liberal democratic countries that actually fight. The US has made a strategic bet. India will decisively shape the military balance in Asia. And in this era of confrontation with China, at a time when people say the US's military is losing its edge over the Liberation Army, well, this wager that India will decisively shape the military balance, this will have a major impact on the future trajectory of the world. I believe, having made this wager, the United States will win. We'll make sure they win.
Thank you, Ambassador Vora. As always, a historical perspective to the conversation.
I'm sorry, forgive me.
No, it was wonderful, sir. I think it puts things into modern day perspective even better. I'm going to jump off something you said here. It's a perfect transition for my next question. You said that the U.S.-India relationship is the premier strategic relationship to emerge in that region in Asia. So I'm going to go to Ambassador Kapoor here. Ambassador Kapoor, what can you share with us about how the U.S.-India relationship will emerge, if you are confident in making that statement, as the defining partnership of the 21st century. And I'd love for you to comment on something Ambassador Vora said, that when you have two equals, it's not an alliance, it's a rivalry. As India continues to grow, especially at the speed that it is growing, not that it is going to emerge as a rival to the United States, but how will that affect the dynamics of the partnership as well, Ambassador Kapoor?
Thank you, Ashmita, and thank you, Ambassador Vora, for the very brilliant exposition. It is very useful to put it in context, and along with Professor Nalapat's comments earlier, which were very, very learned. What I'd like to say, Ashmita, is that from the perspective of the US, if I see the strategic threats, and if I have to list them out, and this exercise was done in 89-90. I was at the Georgetown University as a faculty, and at that time they had listed out, Islamic terrorism and China and Japan and the European Union as the potential threats. Today, when I see them listing out their current threats, China is number one, and then followed by Islamic terrorism or whatever. And if I see the landscape of US strategic interests, they are being threatened in so many different aspects. In the South China Seas, the US Navy and the US Air Force has been threatened on a regular basis, if not daily, at least on a weekly basis, for the last so many years now. Then if I see the trade relationship, everybody knows about how fraught that relationship is. Professor Nalapad has mentioned about artificial intelligence, for example, about technology, about intellectual property. There are too many conflicts. About the influence which China wields today, not only in the third world countries in the rest of the world, but in your own backyard in the US. If, like yesterday, the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo mentioned that even the MIT has been under Chinese influence. Earlier we had learned about Harvard University being under Chinese influence, Yale University being under Chinese influence. Now we hear about MIT and Columbia University. Now these are what universities are? These are Ivy League universities, the premier most universities in the world rankings. If they have fallen under Chinese influence, what can stand steadfast against that sort of influence? The media in the US has also been called out for being under Chinese influence, including very great icons like Washington Post and New York Times, of having received funding from the Chinese government and agencies. So to that extent, for US at home and abroad, it is a very significant threat. If the UK is an important partner with US, Hong Kong, what has happened in Hong Kong is a matter of grave concern to the world, not only to the US. The treatment of the people, the citizens in Xinjiang, is of great concern to the entire world. The threat to Taiwan is a very serious threat to Taiwan and US and the rest of the world. Similarly, if we see the Indian perspective, our security and strategic threat number one today is China, and fortunately that is being acknowledged and recognized even by those who are trying to distract the attention from China towards Pakistan and towards other aspects, are now sort of not getting that sort of hearing, let us say, in the Indian public or in the Indian media, even though they are sold to the Chinese interest. I know of the Indian industry, for example, big captains of industry being lured into China with very great incentives and becoming supporters of China. Similarly, in the media, for their media courses, journalism courses, Professor Nalapat is here, he'll vouch for it. How so many people from the Indian media, I've seen the Hindu and Ram, for example, being invited to China, and then the stance of the Hindu newspaper changing overnight on Dalai Lama from a positive one to a negative one. So these are shocking things which you see, and we as observers of diplomacy have seen that happen for so many years now, decades, very closely, as a fact. So it is a given that with the viewpoints of the strategic communities in both the countries and the political communities, and there being bipartisan support in the US for its relations with India, the relations with India will flourish, will expand with Biden and Harris in a very steadfast manner. What I want to say about this aspect of rivalry, yes, Ambassador Vora has mentioned, it's absolutely correct in the sense when there is a reigning hegemon in the world, prevailing hegemon, and it is challenged by a challenger hegemon like China. In the history of the world, it has been seen that in most cases, it has resulted in very serious wars and even world wars. So currently, we are in the Cold War phase, as Professor Nalapat mentioned. Yes, we are in a very serious Cold War phase already, and people may take time to recognize or acknowledge it or understand it. And it's going to get worse before it gets any better. We have to see whether it blows up into a full-scale war with pieces, following on both sides and countries supporting either side, or it stops just short of that, considering the way the world is, engaged in a conversation on real-time basis regularly. Thank you, Ashmita.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor, and of course, Ambassador Vora, prior to that, for your comments on this. Ambassador Kapoor, you're talking a little bit about China's influence on these other countries in the world and their ability to infiltrate extremely credible, well-respected entities to push forward their propaganda, their messaging about their place in the world. But when we talk about any country's place in the world, you know, this is the perfect segue to talk about the UN Security Council, right? I'd like to start with Professor Nalapat on this and get all three of your views. How much confidence do you feel, Professor, that the Biden administration will actively push for India to be on the UN Security Council as a permanent member? I mean, as Indians, I feel that this is long, long overdue, yet here we are still wondering if this administration will even take up the issue, if this is even a possibility for us. We'll start with you, Professor.
Well, you know, I'd like to point out that Joe Biden has some kind of a relationship with a gentleman named Barack Obama. And I think the two worked together for 8 years. And it was Barack Obama, if I remember, who pushed first for India to become a member of the Security Council. And if I'm not mistaken, a lady called Susan Rice was very active in that particular push. And I believe she's now been appointed by incoming President Biden to an important place in the administration. Now, I mean, so frankly, I'm not at all worried about that. The reason is, Ashmita, that look, the relationship between India and the US is a, you know, bottom-up relationship. The US and China is a top-down relationship. It began at the top, went on to the elites, and frankly, it has largely been confined to the elites. In the case of the India-US relationship, you have now about 4 million proud Americans. And if I may say so, among the most productive Americans in your population who are Indian American. And this is a very strong relationship between India and America that America doesn't have, definitely, with, in the sense, with very many countries. It has, of course, got that with China. And this is a bit of a risk factor because General Secretary Xi Jinping, to use the title that makes him strong, believes that every ethnic Chinese should function for the greater glory of the Han people led by Comrade Xi Jinping. So whether you're a Chinese in Pittsburgh, whether you've been Chinese only in the sense you've been in the US as a family for 3 generations, no way. If you're ethnic Chinese, well, you have to work for the greater good of China. And I'm sorry to say that, that has worked for some time. But these days, I'm also happy to say Taiwan has been coming up. And one thing I'd like to give credit to President Trump. President Trump has broken a lot of glass in the State Department over the relationship with Taiwan. He has been really extremely good in the sense of recognizing the importance of Taiwan in the first island chain. The Taiwanese are ethnic Chinese. And therefore, Taiwan is now emerging as a very important democratic force, which definitely is not a PRC, even though it is ethnic Chinese. And I think that is helping very much in this worldwide thing. I only want to end by a small little, a small little comment, and that is that another reason why India and the United States are going to come together. I think we are very close to having as many people in India who speak English as you do in the United States, especially when you have so many people speaking Spanish and only Spanish in the United States. I can tell you that I'm not supposed to speak any English. Now, I'm sure some Englishmen will say that this guy doesn't speak English. I mean, what I'm speaking, Ambassador Vora speaks much better English than I do. But I'd like to say that more than 300 million Indians speak English. I have long held that we should promote the study of English. And let me tell you, in a 21st century Anglosphere, it's not the blood of the, what do you say, the blood that defines it, it's the mind, it's the language. And today, India is very much a part of a 21st century Anglosphere, and no 2 Anglosphere countries have been anything except very friendly to each other. As Ambassador Vora says, I rest my case.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, That's such an interesting point you make about the language. I think there is absolutely no doubt that will continue to strengthen the bond between these two countries, and the growing population and the growing prominence of the Indian population in the United States certainly helps as well. Ambassador Vora, once again, do you think this administration will finally be the one that pushes for India to have that space at the Security Council, or do you feel that the forces that may be that are pulling in the other direction will prevail in the end, at least for the next 4 years?
You referred to an organization. What did you call it? United something?
The UN Security Council, sir.
No, United Nations they used to call it, yes. I recall Professor Nalapat, 75 years ago it was born. I wonder how many things Miss Ashmita has in her house that are 75 years old and still useful, apart from your parents. You really cannot solve an issue with the mindset that created it. You need another thought process. The United Nations, ma'am, has had its day. We wasted far too much of time trying to get what is called a seat on the United Nations Security Council. Everybody and his grandmother wants it. There are countries like Britain and France who have no reason on earth to be sitting there. Militarily, economically, politically, their influence today is far less than that of India. I mean, India gives more money in terms of international assistance to various developing countries, 156 at last count, than probably Britain and France do, because they have perpetual financial crises, which you are familiar with. So this particular system is not going to work. We've been talking about it for 50 years. It's not going to work unless the UN itself collapses and a new international organization comes. As far as the final thing about our relationship with this present administration is concerned, ma'am, how do you reverse a momentum that has built up over the decades? You'll be able to reverse it when the moon is made of blue cheese, not before that. We are seeing this happen. And as far as our bilateral relationship with the United States is concerned, I served in Washington from 82 to 85. I saw at that stage how popular Pakistan was in the American perception, American calculation. Then China, and since the 70s, the intention was not to kiss China on both cheeks because you loved the American system. The intention was to clobber the Soviet Union. And when that was achieved, then Pakistan was abandoned. So we've been seeing this. But as far as our bilateral relationship is concerned, if the Americans think that they're going to use India, fight China to the last Indian, we're not going to let that happen. But together, of course, we will teach China a lesson. The bilateral relationship, Professor Nalapat, reminds me of that catchphrase for the Virginia Slims ad in the 70s when they had started advertising the Slim cigarettes for encouraging women to smoke. It was a sign of women's liberation. The catchphrase which defines our relationship today was, "You've come a long way, baby." I believe that expresses it all.
Thank you, Ambassador Vora. If I'm hearing this correctly, to some extent, in your perspective, the UN and the pursuit and the interactions that the nations, the participating nations, undertake with this organization may be on its way to being obsolete, like you said.
But it's already become a virtual entity. What happened at the United Nations General Assembly in 2020? People delivered their speeches from wherever they were. Nobody listened to them. When it was time for the president, I'm special advisor to 3 prime ministers. When it was time for those fellows to make their speeches, say, "Sir, please get on it." Say, "Oh, it's my time. Okay, where's my speech? Where's my speech?" Made his speech for 20 minutes and went and had breakfast or dinner or lunch, whatever it was. No one takes it seriously anymore. I believe not even the majority of the 40,000 characters who work for it and get their salaries from it. No, it's an entity that is long past its prime.
But Ambassador Vora, there is one thing, and we are once again changing directions here, that is absolutely not obsolete, and that is trade, that is money, the exchange of money, goods across borders. And I'd like to jump to Ambassador Kapoor here. Ambassador, do you feel that under the new administration that this administration may restore the most favored nation status that India has enjoyed in trade deals with the United States? That unfortunately was one of the things that was a point of conflict and contention under the Trump administration. Ambassador Kapoor?
Thank you, Ashmita. This is a very important aspect of the relation between the two countries. And it is not only the administration team of President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris who are very important players in this game. It's also the officials of the two countries, and who is appointed as the USTR or the Secretary of Commerce. They play a very important role. So what I would think is that if there are people in these positions who have worked with India in the past, or if there are people who have, for example, lived in India in the past, either working for the US government in the US embassy or whatever, then I've seen that their attitudes generally undergo a very significant change and they become ambassadors for India in the US. So if some such people are chosen in those positions who have a very enlightened attitude in the US, then I see a lot of this changing. So overall, even in other positions, it would be the same, but particularly in the trade aspect, there are very thorny issues, very contentious issues. So depending on the people who come into those positions and what sort of advice they give to the president and the vice president, things will improve or will not improve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
He hedges his bets as a good diplomat should. I'm far more open about. He's like the Indian weather forecasters of 30 years ago. So what's the possibility range? 50%. Will it be warm? 50%. Will it be dry? 50%. Thank you very much. Even I can predict that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Kapoor and Ambassador Vora, for keeping the conversation fun as always. Professor Nalapat, I'd love to hear from you. Money makes the world go round. Do you feel that this administration will have any specific advantages for the trade relationship specifically between the United States and India? Professor?
Well, I'd like to say that if you're looking at Cold War 2.0, I think, frankly, that defines a relationship. The relationship with China was defined by Cold War 1.0. And frankly, the collapse of the Soviet Union was a disaster for China eventually, because now then the Americans slowly started, their eyes slowly started opening about China. But I'd simply like to point out that, when we talk in terms of the US-India trade relationship and the US-China trade relationship, well, I think there's been an excellent choice made as the US trade representative, and that is Dr. Tai. Dr. Tai has got Taiwanese roots. Her family lives in Taiwan, and I don't think any of them believe that they are PRC. They're ethnic Chinese, but they're very proud Taiwanese. And I remember the first time I went to Taiwan, that was in the 90s, and I went there, and I gave my passport. And then he said, have you come here before? No, I've not visited the Republic of China before. And the passport guy told me, well, we're not Republic of China, we're Taiwan. That was back in the 90s when there was no mention of Taiwan anywhere. I mean, I quickly got my lesson. I stopped saying Republic of China in Taiwan very definitely after that. But I'd just like to say that I think these are very good choices. So I think, Joe Biden has made choices. He's made the choice of a retired general as the chief as the Secretary of Defense. Our Prime Minister has made the choice of a retired Foreign Service officer as External Affairs Minister. Now you have a retired general. People are saying, oh no, you shouldn't be the military. Look, that's absurd. General Austin all his life has been very respectful of the discipline or in a democracy of the civilians controlling the ministry. And General Austin's always respected civilian control. But the fact that Joe Biden has tapped a former military person indicates that Joe Biden knows that it could be a very unpleasant situation for the US at any time, thanks to the new situation it is finding itself in. So I'm actually heartened by some of the picks of Joe Biden. And may I point out that if you check my articles, I think I was one of the first to say among the most ideal choices for vice president would be a certain senator named Kamala Harris. And I got a lot of congratulatory phone calls, but I can assure you my role in that particular decision or any decision of the Biden administration, unfortunately, has been zero.
Thank you, Professor Nala, but undecidedly undiplomatic with hedging your bets here. In this case, you were spot on with your choice for Kamala Harris as VP. Professor, you've mentioned Joe Biden's choice of General Austin. I just want to mention, I believe he is, by picking a military post for that position, has defied, I believe, something like 60 years of tradition of folks picking civilian leaders, a ridiculous precedent. But in any case, here, at least in the United States, that's viewed as a classically democratic move that Democrats, once they reach the White House, feel that they have to flex their muscles, militarily speaking, so as not to be perceived as weak. So there's a lot of points about General Austin as a pick, but I agree. In any case, moving a little bit more internally now, let's talk about some of the issues that are key to India domestically, and how they are perceived and reacted by the international sphere, specifically the United States. I'd like to go back to Ambassador Vora for this. Ambassador Vora, how do you feel that the Biden administration will take a stand on issues that are, unique to India, that are our own to kind of sort out, whether it's Kashmir, whether it's the Citizenship Amendment Act, and other issues? I mean, we're not going to get into this today, but even the farm protests that are taking place, and popping up on all international media in such a large way. How do you feel, Ambassador Vora, that the Biden administration will chime in on these decidedly internal matters for India?
It's very difficult to second guess what they're going to do or try and anticipate, because I smashed my looking glass, my crystal ball, many years ago. The world keeps changing so rapidly that no one can keep pace. What will happen is they'll make the usual noise about human rights, which is a very funny term, because in our planet there are far more human wrongs than human rights. But we all talk of human rights, which are very few and far between. They're going to make noise about that. They're going to make noise about India buying more Harley Davidsons. They're going to talk about having greater tolerance, etc. Issues like Kashmir and Palestine, ma'am, and this is something to be internalized by the whole world, have been sorted out or solved outside that so-called UN system. Palestine had held the world hostage for 70 years. Along comes this character called Donald Trump and says, look, brother Palestine, go away. We'll sort it out by cozying up to Israel making normal relations with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Sudan, with Morocco, with Saudi Arabia, with whoever else. It was solved out. So as far as Kashmir is concerned, its status has been regularized within the Indian body politic, within the Indian framework. That has been done. In 5 years. No one will talk about it anymore. There is a time value for money. There is a time value for ideas. There is a time value for issues, and this will be forgotten over a period of time. So I believe that the positive side, the bridges that exist between us, will be strengthened, while there will be lip service paid to whatever is seen to be divergences between our two relationships. It cannot be any other way. I'm getting on in years. As I say always, that I'm sitting in the departure lounge, waiting for my train to take me to the next world. I have my boarding pass in my hand. I don't know when it will come. But if I meet a character called Ping Pong in that world, I'll tell him, you had a chance to make your mark, buddy. You blew it. India has a chance to prove to the world that it's a competent, serious, reliable, dependable international player, and see what success India has made of it.
Thank you, Ambassador Vora. I just want to say we have a lot more wonderful and really thought-provoking questions on our roster here, but unfortunately we don't have the time to get to all of them. So this is my unabashed way of saying that you will all have to join us again in this series so we can deeper dive on some of these matters. But I'm going to use the last 10 minutes of our time here today to answer some of the great questions we're getting from our viewers, our folks that are watching this webinar.
If you're running out of time, use a made in China watch. It doesn't tell the time. It does everything except tell the time.
Thank you. My watch is Swiss. I don't do Chinese watches, but thank you. Good to know. Going to the questions, I think this one is a very unique question, specifically in terms of the terms that are left here. So Prime Minister Modi, and this is from CG Daniel to all of the panelists, Prime Minister Modi during the Howdy Modi event in 2018 in Texas office, endorsed President Trump by saying, "Ab ki baar Trump sarkar." Those who don't know Hindi, after this time, there will be another Trump administration, is basically what he said. So his, CG Daniel has said his interference, Modi's interference with this country has dangerously affected the relationship with the Biden administration. How will Modi normalize the damaged reputation? Professor Nalapat, I'd like to start with you since you are sitting in India. Do you feel that Modi even needs to normalize or undo anything, any relationships or comments he made about President Trump coming in again, or do you feel that it's irrespective, Professor Nalapat?
Well, look, I can only say that Mr. Modi as chief minister was denied a visa by a gentleman called G.W. Bush, and that denial of the visa continued under a gentleman called B.H. Obama. But I'd only like to say that everybody expected that it's going to be a very, very rocky relationship when the gentleman who was denied a visa became Prime Minister of India. What happened? He and Obama had a love feast. And I have a weird theory about this. And my weird theory is that Obama is the first African-American president of a long chain of white male presidents. I'm sorry that we don't have a female president yet in the United States. I think you guys better get civilized. But the second thing is Prime Minister Modi is the first backward class Prime Minister of India. I remember when I wrote in the Sunday Guardian that he belonged to the most backward of the backward class. I had a call from a particular chief minister of a western state. I'm not going to name that state or the chief minister, who said, look, I don't believe in caste. And what are you talking about caste? I said, look, these are the facts. I believe in reporting the facts. And lo and behold, in the 2014 election campaign, everybody and his grandmother and grandfather used to refer to Prime Minister Modi's caste because that's a huge group of voters, and they all flock to the reality that if Modi, the BJP wins, you'll have the first backward class Prime Minister of India. So I'd only like to say, frankly, Prime Minister Modi understands the reality of the Indo-Pacific. I think, Joe Biden may talk about Asia-Pacific. Somebody wrote that speech for him. Biden was too busy to read it. Otherwise, you have to replace it with Indo-Pacific. Frankly, Asia-Pacific is 18th century. I don't know why, Biden has got 18th century speechwriters around him. But the reality is, I can tell you, core interests will bind our two countries together. And whether it is howdy Modi or howdy Biden, believe me, there's going to be a howdy Biden very, very soon. And there's going to be a love feast for Kamala Harris when she comes into Tamil Nadu. There were so many posters of Kamala Harris in Tamil Nadu. I almost thought that they'd mistaken her for Jayalalitha. I've only seen posters that many for Jayalalitha. And then I realized, my God, it's about Kamala Harris. So look, let's be honest. I mean, I'm not as worried as Mr. Daniels is at all.
Thank you, Professor Nalapat, for the wonderful response and some laughs for us all. I think in choosing Kamala Harris, Biden already cemented a stronger U.S.-American relationship. I have one specific question for
Ma'am, I'd like to intervene if you don't mind, to add to what Professor Nalapat has said. Look, 50,000 Indians at Howdy Modi. India interfering in the US elections, or that one statement made on the spur of the moment. How many Americans even know what Ab Ki Baar Trump Sarkar means? The country that interfered in US elections is China through its virus. Trump, what he did on employment, Trump, what he did on incomes, Trump, what he did on trade, faded into the background. The number one issue was Trump didn't handle the virus well. So if there's any nation that interfered, it was not Russia or Iran or India. It was China through its virus. That was the core issue. India had no role to play.
Ambassador Vora, the next question is directed at you specifically. So I'm glad I have you here. This is from Mr. Prem Valyuthan. Mr. Prem asks, Ambassador Vora, would you agree that multilateralism is dead and bilateralism is a more productive diplomatic mechanism? Ambassador Vora.
There is no question about it that we are seeing a retreat of multilateralism, which had replaced bilateralism when the world's thinkers got together and said, much better to have multilateralism. I believe we are now headed for the stage of non-lateralism, where we will deal with issues as we think fit on a case-by-case basis. Because multilateralism had this weakness, you had to carry everybody along with you. And you know, there is an expression, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's called Shivji's Bharat. When he got married, the Lord Shiva, when he went to claim his spouse, then the people who joined the wedding procession, they were thieves and scoundrels and saints and rishis and wonderful people and terrible people. Everybody joined it. Multilateralism had become a kind of Shivji ki Bharat. So I do believe, I agree entirely with what you're saying, that future relationships will be determined on a interest to interest basis. If it's my interest and your interest, let's get together and make that relationship. And if others wish to join, wish to accrete around it, we have no problem. That is why I use the term non-lateralism.
Wonderful. A new term for us all. Thank you, Ambassador Vora.
I just invented it. It's my intellectual property.
Exactly. So that's an even special treat for all of us. We're the first to hear. Thank you for that. Another question from Mr. Prem. I'm going to go to Ambassador Kapoor for this. Mr. Prem asks, which areas would see protectionism in India and the US under the Biden-Harris trade policy? And Ambassador Kapoor, of course, you know, you and I have talked about this. The United States under a Biden administration will undoubtedly turn towards itself a little bit more, be a little bit more protectionist, even though President Trump was known as the America First president. His actions were classically a business transactional approach to foreign relations versus Biden. So Ambassador Kapoor, how do you see protectionism evolving under the Biden administration?
Well, I see the relations between the two countries improving on all the fronts, and I don't see any great issues around these relations, whether they are trade or any other aspects. I see improvement, significant improvements. So there will be, discussions, there will be negotiations, there will be disagreements. But when you see what is your big picture, what is the big vision, and where are you headed, and are you headed there together or not? And if you are headed there together, how are you going to make it work? So when that is your vision, that is your thinking, these things automatically recede into the background and do not occupy your space in negotiations and discussions in a relationship. And they become more easily resolved. Let me put it that way. So I don't see any issues like protectionism between India and US emerging as significant, impacting our relationship significantly at all whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. Hopefully that answered some of the questions that we received. Once again, unfortunately, time is limited here, so I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Matthew to do a vote of thanks at the end, so we can wrap this up. And I have some exciting announcements for the next webinar as well. But Mr. Matthews, please, would love to hear a couple of words from you for the closing of this program today.
You're muted. Can you unmute?
Hello, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I am becoming a technological wizard nowadays. Okay, meticulously very informative. It was a great virtual webinar on a highly important topic on which international media and journalists are keenly watching now. Why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is coming up with a new administration in the greatest democratic country. We are proud enough that our press club is a responsible organization. It's a responsible media organization, often discussing on similar issues with the participation of distinguished diplomats and defense experts. Thank you all for the esteemed panelists and participants for making our web series 2 on Indian-American relationship under the new administration of Biden and Harris new taking over the management of America for the next couple of years. We are keenly waiting for that. On behalf of the entire IAPC Board of Directors, National Executive Committee, and the chapter members, may I thank you all. Honorable Ambassador Deepak Gora, thank you so much for your valuable presence and making this event so lively, humorous, and informative. Goraji, in fact, took time to educate us with your few years of history and where we are now with economic and security threats by our neighboring countries. May I bestow our profound thanks for your mighty presence as a panelist on our today's virtual webinar. Thank you, Pradeep Kumar Ji. You are a close friend of IAPC and making our events more lively. Your vast diplomatic relationships in different countries, you could present the fact that now China is influencing various leading universities in America and how they are strategically posing a global threat nowadays. Thank you, Professor M.D. Nalpat, Vice Chairman of Manipal University, being an active panelist and sharing important views on this topic. You have been writing very encouraging articles, even during last year itself, on the better administration awaiting under Biden's presidency, supported by India's own pride, Kamala Harris. Especially his affirmation that China is almost becoming equal to USA in technology and resources, especially with the artificial intelligence. Thank you very much, Professor Nalapat, for keeping the webinar vibrant and filling with humorous comments along with other distinguished guests. Finally, Ashmita Yogiraj, Director of Just Marketing Corporation, renowned TV host, a big thanks to you for introducing and hosting our virtual webinar in a good decorum. Thank you. Special thanks to our...
Sorry. So I was just going to say, when you go home today, all of you, please drop an old piece of porcelain on the ground and say, I have just shattered China.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Special thanks to our IT and Zoom team, all others who made this happen within few days preparations. We'll be coming up with more similar Zoom webinars with topics of general interest, national importance, and international importance, or for media importances, and look forward for all of your participation and support. Our events will be broadcasted on various TV channels and other media. The links will be provided to you all shortly on our website. Once again, thank you all and wish you a very happy year-end and a happy new year. Enjoy a good weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. Appreciate the kind words. And I just want to quickly announce before everyone's done here, we have another exciting webinar, same time next Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern. We're going to talk about the contentious farm bills that we briefly mentioned in this conversation today. We'll get in depth and clear up some of those misconceptions. And once again, I want to thank you to the eminent panelists, speakers, the IAPC team, but most importantly, the participants that joined us and not just participated in the webinar, asked some great questions to round us off today. Everyone have a great rest of your afternoon or evening, Professor Nalapat, and we will all connect soon. Take care. Have a good rest of your time.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.